You won't believe what I saw the moment I walked up to my own front door. After 2 exhausting weeks away on a business trip overseas, all I wanted was to finally relax in the comfort of my own mansion. The long flights, the endless meetings, and the constant rushing from one city to another had drained every ounce of my energy. My plan was simple: get home, drop my bags, grab a cold drink, and sink into my leather couch while enjoying the peace of my own space. But instead of peace, I walked straight into a nightmare. The moment I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. My home looked the same from a distance, but there were small details that made my stomach twist. The curtains in the front windows were closed. That was strange because I never keep those particular curtains drawn. I like natural sunlight streaming through when I'm home, and I always leave them open when I'm away. My heart skipped a beat. Maybe the housekeeper had closed them, but she never did that before. Dragging my suitcase up the front steps, I noticed the doormat. It wasn't in its usual place. I'm the kind of person who pays attention to little details, and I knew exactly how I had left it before my trip. But now, it was slightly off-center, angled toward the door like someone had recently stepped on it. Even more unsettling, there were a pair of shoes tucked neatly to the side, shoes I had never seen in my life. My pulse quickened. I fished out my keys, eager to get inside and figure out what was going on. But when I slid the key into the lock and twisted, it didn't turn. I pulled it out, checked it again, and tried once more. Nothing. My own key wouldn't open my own front door. At that moment, a wave of confusion hit me. Had the locks been changed? Was I locked out of my own house? That didn't make any sense. I hadn't asked anyone to change them, and I'm the only one who has full authority to do so. Thinking it had to be a jammed lock, I rang the doorbell, half annoyed and half nervous. The chime echoed inside, and within seconds, footsteps approached. The door creaked open, and that's when my entire world flipped upside down. Standing in the doorway was a woman I had never seen before. She wasn't dressed like a guest or a visitor. She was in a robe, holding a half-filled glass of wine, wearing slippers, and looking at me with a mix of irritation and smugness, as though I was the one disturbing her evening. For a moment, I actually froze, my brain struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with attitude. I blinked, stunned. "Yes, you can tell me what you're doing in my house. Who are you, and why are you inside my home?" The woman smirked, took a slow sip from her wine glass, and crossed her arms like she was ready for a fight. Then she said the most unbelievable thing I had ever heard in my life. "Actually, I've been living here for 2 weeks, and if you don't leave immediately, I'll call the cops." I almost laughed out loud, thinking this had to be some kind of twisted prank. Maybe I was too tired from my trip and not understanding her correctly. But her expression told me she wasn't joking. She wasn't confused. She wasn't apologetic. She was dead serious. My mind raced. How could this be possible? How could someone I didn't know be standing in my doorway, acting like the rightful owner of my mansion, and threatening to call the police on me, the actual owner? It didn't make sense. None of it did. I tried to keep calm. "Look," I said, "I think you're confused. This is my house. I have the deed. I have proof. I even have the garage remote in my car. You can't just—" But she cut me off, raising her voice so loud the neighbors could probably hear. "You're trespassing. You need to leave this property right now before I get the Homeowners Association involved. You don't belong here." Her voice carried through the neighborhood, and sure enough, I could see curtains shifting and neighbors peeking out to watch the drama unfold. My face burned with frustration. I had just gotten home, and already I was being accused of being a trespasser at my own mansion. That's when it hit me. I wasn't dealing with just anyone. I was dealing with an HOA Karen, the type of person who thrived on drama, who loved rules when they worked in her favor, and who would twist reality itself if it meant getting her way. And from the look in her eyes, she wasn't going to back down. My relaxing homecoming had turned into the beginning of a showdown. I never could have imagined ... At first, I thought this woman had to be joking. Nobody in their right mind could stand in someone else's doorway, glass of wine in hand, and seriously claimed they had been living there for 2 weeks. I even chuckled nervously, waiting for her to laugh too, waiting for her to admit it was some mix-up, or maybe she was just a caretaker or a guest of someone I knew. But her face stayed stone cold, that smug grin not fading one bit. That's when it hit me. She wasn't joking. I tried to reason with her. I pulled out my wallet and showed her my driver's license. My name and address were right there in black and white. I even pointed to the house number mounted clearly above the HOA door, matching perfectly with the ID in my hand. See? This is my property. I own this place. I live here, I explained, my voice firm but calm. Her response? A scoff. She leaned against the door frame and waved her free hand dismissively. Anyone can print an ID. That doesn't mean anything. You're trespassing, and I'm giving you one last warning. Get off my property. The arrogance in her voice made my blood boil. She didn't even sound nervous or defensive. She sounded like she believed she was in the right. Like she had convinced herself so deeply that my home belonged to her that nothing I said mattered. Prove my point? I pulled out the garage remote from my car and pressed the button. The garage door hummed to life and rolled upward, revealing my luxury car parked exactly where I had left it before my trip. I gestured toward it. Does that look like the car of a trespasser to you? That's mine. This is my house. Now tell me what's really going on here. Instead of backing down, she crossed her arms tighter and raised her voice. I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but you're not going to trick me. You think you can intimidate me with your little toys? Wrong. I'm calling the police right now. Before I could say another word, she whipped out her phone and started dialing. Her voice grew even louder as she talked into the receiver. Yes, officer. I need the police immediately. There's a man here trying to break into my home. Yes, he's refusing to leave. Please, hurry. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. She had just flipped the entire situation on its head. And now she was painting me as the criminal. I glanced around, and sure enough, neighbors were starting to gather. A man from across the street leaned on his fence, squinting at me. A couple walked their dog a little slower than usual, pretending to take their time while clearly listening in. And of course, a few had already pulled out their phones, recording the entire scene. The humiliation burned through me. Here I was, standing on the porch of my own mansion, being accused of breaking into it by a stranger who had somehow taken over while I was away. And the worst part? To the onlookers, I probably looked guilty. After all, she was the one inside the house, robe and slippers on, acting like the rightful homeowner. I tried one more time. Listen to me carefully, I said, lowering my voice, but speaking slowly so she couldn't claim she didn't hear me. You are trespassing. I own this property. I can get the documents from my car right now, deeds, bills, everything. You need to stop this before you dig yourself deeper. But she wasn't having it. Her face flushed red, her eyes narrowed, and she pointed at me like a villain in a courtroom drama. You don't scare me. The police will be here any second, and when they arrive, you're going to regret ever stepping foot on my property. The way she emphasized my property made my jaw clench. It was clear this wasn't just a mistake. This was a full-blown act of audacity. She had broken into my mansion, made herself comfortable, and now she was so confident in her lies that she thought she could bully me right off my own front steps. And it was working, at least in the eyes of the neighbors. I could hear them whispering, gossiping, trying to piece the story together without knowing the facts. Some of them shook their heads in disapproval, and I realized they weren't shaking their heads at her. They were shaking their heads at me. Had walked straight into her trap, and she was playing the role of the victim perfectly. But here's the thing about audacity. It can only carry someone so far before the truth catches up. And as much as I wanted to explode with anger, I knew I had to stay calm. The police were on their way, and when they arrived, I'd finally have the chance to set the record straight. What I didn't know yet was just how far Karen was willing to push her lies, and how close I was to seeing the entire neighborhood turn into the audience of the most shocking showdown they'd ever witnessed. 10 minutes felt like an eternity as I stood there on my own porch, locked out of my own mansion, while this woman sipped wine and called the cops on me. My mind kept replaying her words. "You're trespassing. This is my house." And no matter how many times I replayed it, it sounded just as insane. I was the owner. Yet here I was, being painted as the criminal. Finally, comma. The familiar wail of sirens cut through the neighborhood, and within moments, a squad car pulled up. The red and blue lights bounced off the windows of my home, flashing across the perfectly trimmed hedges and polished garage door. My heart sank. Even though I had nothing to hide, there's always that uneasy feeling when police show up. And with the way this woman had twisted the story, I knew I was about to step into a very messy situation. The second the officer stepped out of the car, she rushed toward them like a damsel in distress in some over-the-top movie. "Officers! Thank God you're here," she cried dramatically, clutching the front of her robe with one hand while pointing at me with the other. "This man has been harassing me and trying to break into my home. He refuses to leave." I was terrified. Her performance was so exaggerated, so rehearsed, that if I didn't know better, I might have believed her myself. She even managed to squeeze out fake tears, her voice cracking just enough to make it sound real. The neighbors were eating it up too, whispering among themselves and shaking their heads in disgust. Again, at me. One officer raised his hand to quiet her and turned to me. "Sir, can we get your side of the story?" I nodded, forcing myself to stay calm. "Of course, officers, this is my property. My name is on the deed. I just returned from a 2-week business trip, and when I tried to enter my home, I found this woman inside. She's been living here without my permission. I have proof, my ID, utility bills, even the remote that opens the garage." I gestured toward the garage, where my car sat gleaming under the light. To drive the point home, I pulled out my phone and opened my smart home app, showing the officers how I could control the security system and lights remotely. With a single tap, the porch lights flicked on and off, right in front of them. The officers exchanged a look. One of them asked her, "Ma'am, do you have any documentation that shows this is your residence? A lease, a mortgage statement, utility bills?" For the first time, Karen's confident mask slipped. She stammered, Well, the Homeowners Association approved my stay. They told me I could house sit while the owner was gone." It was such a weak excuse that even the officers raised their eyebrows. "Do you have any paperwork to prove that claim?" I asked, his tone skeptical. She shifted uncomfortably, her wine glass now trembling slightly in her hand. "No, but I don't need paperwork. I've been here for weeks. Everyone knows this is my home." She gestured wildly toward the neighbors, as if their nods of support were enough evidence to back her story. Meanwhile, I calmly walked over to my car, popped the trunk, and pulled out a folder I had prepared for emergencies. Inside were copies of my deed, property tax statements, and utility bills with my name and address printed in bold letters. I handed them to the officers. "Here, everything you need to prove ownership." The officers studied the documents carefully. One of them nodded, clearly convinced. The other turned back to her. "Ma'am, it looks like this property belongs to him. Do you have anything at all that proves your claim?" Her face flushed red. She opened her mouth to argue again, but no words came out. She was caught, and she knew it. Still, in true Karen fashion, she refused to back down completely. "This isn't fair. He left the house empty. The HOA said it was abandoned and I was just taking care of it. He's trying to set me up." The officer sighed and shook his head. "Ma'am, the paperwork is clear. This is his residence, not yours. Unless you can provide proof otherwise, you're trespassing." The crowd of neighbors who had been silently judging me a few minutes ago began whispering in a completely different tone. Some even chuckled quietly, realizing they had believed the wrong person. Phones that had been aimed at me were now recording her meltdown instead. I stood there silently, watching her squirm, watching the reality sink in that her scheme was crumbling. For 2 weeks she had played queen of the mansion, drinking wine, lounging in my robe, living like she owned the place. But now, the truth was out. and no amount of shouting or fake tears could cover it up. The officers gave her one last chance. "Ma'am, you can either leave peacefully now, or we'll have no choice but to place you under arrest for trespassing and squatting. The choice is yours." Her jaw tightened, her fists clenched, and for a moment I thought she was going to explode into full-blown hysteria. But then she stomped her foot, muttered something under her breath, and stormed back inside to grab her things. And as she disappeared into my home to pack, I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The nightmare wasn't over yet, but at least the tide was finally turning in my favor. The officers decided they needed to take a closer look, so they motioned for all of us to step inside. I hadn't set foot in my house yet, and as soon as I crossed the threshold, I felt my chest tighten. This was supposed to be the place where I found comfort, the place I worked hard for, the mansion I was proud to call my own. But what I walked into didn't feel like my home at all. It felt like someone else's messy playground. The first thing that hit me was the smell. A mix of cheap perfume, spilled wine, and leftover food lingered in the air. My polished wooden floors, usually spotless, were scuffed and sticky in spots. The living room, my beautiful living room, looked like it had hosted a wild party every night. Wine bottles lined the coffee table, pizza boxes were stacked near the fireplace, and my expensive leather couch was covered in stains and crumbs. I could hardly recognize the place. Karen strutted inside as if nothing was wrong, tossing her hair over her shoulder like she was showing the officers her palace. "See, this is my home. Look at how lived in it is. Does this look like someone else's house to you?" she said, almost daring them to disagree. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep calm. One of the officers turned to me. "Sir, can you confirm if any of this property is yours?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Everything in here is mine. That couch, that television, that artwork on the wall, every single piece. I can even provide receipts if you want them." But it wasn't just my furniture. As we walked deeper into the house, I saw just how far she had gone to make herself at home. My fridge, which I had left nearly empty before my trip, was now crammed full of groceries I never bought. Cheap frozen dinners, soda, and snacks stuffed in every corner. Half of my cabinets were bare, as if she had already eaten through most of my supplies. My wine collection had clearly been raided too. Several of the bottles I'd been saving were missing, and the rest sat half empty on the counters. We moved into the hallway, and that's when I saw something that really made my blood boil. Hanging neatly in my closet were not just my clothes, but hers. Dresses, shoes, handbags, all carefully arranged as though she had been living there for years. My expensive cologne bottles were pushed aside to make space for her perfume. Even my bathroom had been invaded. My toothbrush was missing, replaced by hers, and my luxury toiletries had been half used and left uncapped on the counter. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them muttered under his breath, "She really moved in." I turned to Karen, my patience wearing thinner by the second. "You didn't just squat here. You moved your entire life into my house. You've been living like it's yours, using my things, eating my food, wearing out my furniture. Do you realize how insane this is?" She waved me off with a laugh that sounded more forced than confident. "Don't be dramatic. I was taking care of the place. Someone had to keep it occupied. It would have been a shame to leave such a beautiful home sitting empty." The arrogance in her voice made the officers step in. "Ma'am," one said sharply, "taking care of a place means you were asked to. He clearly didn't give you permission. That means you broke in and took over a property. That doesn't belong to you. That's trespassing, plain and simple." Karen's face tightened, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she looked nervous. Her bravado was cracking, but still, she tried to salvage her story. "The HOA knew about it," she insisted. "They said I could stay here." The officers immediately shook their heads. "Unless you can provide official documentation, an HOA has no authority to hand over someone else's private property. You have no legal right to be here." As if to hammer the point home, the HOA president himself showed up at the door, drawn by the police cars outside. He stepped in, took one look at the scene and sighed. "I don't know what she told you," he said to the officers, "but we never gave her permission to stay here. She's been nothing but a problem for this neighborhood. Complaints every week about someone's lawn, someone's trash cans, parking spaces, you name it. But this is beyond anything we've dealt with before." Karen's eyes widened, and she turned on him like a cornered animal. "You liar, you said I could." The HOA president shook his head calmly. "No, I never said that, and I've already documented her harassing half the residents here. If you need a witness, I'll be one." It was over. The truth was laid out in plain sight. The officers no longer had any doubts, the neighbors were murmuring in shock, and Karen's last defense had crumbled. She was nothing more than a squatter who had taken advantage of my absence, and now she had no way out. The officers gave her a stern look. "Ma'am, you need to gather your belongings immediately. You have 5 minutes to get the essentials and leave this property, or we'll place you under arrest." Karen's face twisted with rage. She stomped her foot like a child, muttering about conspiracies, about how everyone was against her. But no one was listening anymore. The neighborhood, the HOA, and the police all stood on the same side now, and she was completely alone. A's. She stormed off toward the bedroom to pack. I finally allowed myself to breathe. My house wasn't safe yet, but the truth was out, and for the first time in hours, I felt like I was getting my home back. Asterisk. Karen stomped around the house like a storm cloud as the officers gave her 5 minutes to gather her things. I watched. Her fling clothes into a suitcase, muttering under her breath about how unfair it was, how she was the real victim here, and how I would regret this. Every slam of a drawer, every heavy step she took was dripping with bitterness. She wasn't packing quietly. She wanted everyone, including the neighbors still watching outside, to hear her tantrum. I stood in the living room, arms crossed, surrounded by the mess she had created. Empty bottles, food wrappers, dog toys scattered. Across the floor, it looked like she had turned my home into her personal playground. The officers stood near the doorway, keeping a close eye on her to make sure she didn't try to take anything that wasn't hers. At one point, she tried to walk out with a decorative vase that had been in my family for years. "This is mine," she snapped when one of the officers stopped her. The officer shook his head firmly. "No, ma'am, this belongs to him. Put it down." She glared at me like I had personally stolen something from her. For a moment, I thought she might actually throw the vase at the floor just to spite me. But with the officer standing right there, she set it down hard enough to make it rattle and stormed back to the bedroom. Outside, the crowd had grown. More neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, some whispering, others openly recording with their phones. I could hear snippets of conversation. "I can't believe she did this. She always acted like she owned the neighborhood. This is insane." The same people who had doubted me when she first screamed "trespasser" were now shaking their heads at her. It was almost poetic. Her own performance had backfired, and now the whole community was seeing her true colors. Finally, Karen emerged, with 2 suitcases and her little dog tucked under her arm. Her face was red, her hair messy, and her robe half open like she had rushed through the packing. She tried one last time to flip the script. "This isn't over," she shouted, pointing at me with the kind of dramatic flair you only see in courtroom dramas. "You set me up. You're all against me. I'll sue every single one of you." The HOA president, who had been standing near the officers, stepped forward with folded arms. "Good luck with that, Karen. You've been banned from the HOA permanently. You've crossed too many lines, and this one takes the cake." Her mouth dropped open, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked genuinely speechless. She turned to the officers, expecting them to defend her, but all she got was the same calm, firm response. "Ma'am, you need to leave now." With no other choice, she huffed, stomped down the walkway, and dragged her suitcases behind her. The dog barked wildly as if sharing her anger. The police escorted her all the way to the sidewalk before finally letting her go, and just like that, she was out of my house. The silence that followed was almost deafening. I stood there, looking around at my ruined living room, the spilled wine, the crumbs, the furniture out of place. It wasn't the home I had left 2 weeks ago, but at least it was mine again. The neighbors began to disperse, though many of them stopped to apologize. "We're so sorry," one said. "We really thought she was telling the truth at first." Another neighbor shook his head in disbelief. "She always seemed a little intense, but we never thought she'd go this far." The HOA president walked over, sighing deeply. "She's been a problem for a long time. Complaints about everyone else's property, yelling at kids for riding bikes too close to her yard, even threatening to fine people for trash cans being out too long. But this? Moving into your house? This is a whole new level." He gave me a firm handshake. "I'll be filing a full report on this, and if you want to press charges, you absolutely should." I nodded, still processing everything. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, while another part wanted to scream. But mostly, I felt relief. Relief that the nightmare was over. Relief that the truth had won out. Later, I learned that several neighbors had uploaded their videos of the entire ordeal to social media. Within days, the clips went viral. Millions of people watched as Karen called the cops on me, only to be exposed as the squatter herself. Comments poured in, calling her the HOA Karen of the Year, mocking her meltdown and praising the police for handling it calmly. As for Karen, I heard she moved out of the neighborhood entirely after being banned from the HOA. Nobody has seen her since. Some say she's living with relatives. Others think she just found another place to cause trouble. Whatever the case, she won't be bothering me or anyone else in that community again. Standing in my cleaned-up living room a week later, I finally felt at peace. The mess was gone, the locks had been changed, and my house once again felt like my sanctuary. I realized something important. Sometimes the people who scream the loudest about rules and control are the ones who break them the most. Karen thought she could twist reality, make herself the victim, and bully everyone into believing her lies. But in the end, the truth was louder. And the best part? The very cops she called on me ended up escorting her out. She tried to weaponize authority against me, but it backfired in spectacular fashion. That was the sweetest justice of all.